Hey, big shout out to all of our listeners out there, including John Webb in Ohio, Kua Canyo in the Philippines, Ross Barber-Smith in Scotland, and Lori Jacobson in New York. Thanks for listening.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
Back in the studio. Maybe I should say our remote studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. With us today from London, I'm going to assume, London, England.
That's right.
In London, England is Sascha Darrock Davies. I hope I said that correct.
That's correct. Hi, Bob.
Sascha, thank you so much for being on the show. A little bit about you before we get into what you and your company does. You started playing the violin at a very young age, from what I understand, 5 years old.
That's right, yes. Yeah, wow, you've done your research.
and then you went on and, of course, from what I understand, played drums and moved into other things. Went to college, got a degree, spent several years recording and touring, got a record deal. You've been a busy guy.
I'm very lucky, really, because I've just continued to be able to sort of practice music and work within the music industry when I came to sort of be more grown up and not just rely on sort of gigging and having fun as part of music in my life. So yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey, I have to say, yeah. But the violin thing was funny because I did start at 5, but there was about 30 of us all playing in one lesson. So we sat there in pizzicato for about a year before we kind of got anywhere near a bow or anything like that. So it was a slow start, but that was a good grounding. And then I discovered rock and roll and sort of lost a little bit of interest in the violin, sadly. I did a deal with my mum at the time and I said, I want to give up violin. She said, okay, well, you have to take up another proper instrument because drums apparently wasn't enough. So so that had to be I took up piano at that point as well, which I didn't give as much time as I should have, and I've started again in recent years just to kind of keep my musical understanding in shape.
What were your musical influences growing up?
Both my parents had a great record collection, and music was a fairly common feature in the home. Dad particularly was quite diverse. He quite strict upbringing, a lot of classical music in his household, but then he loved a lot of Motown and he loved a lot of 70s rock. So that was a big influence. He was very much what we call a dad rock guy in the 80s, so when I was growing up. So, great bands, but bands that are now possibly considered a little bit, well, let's say not as cool as some, so the U2s and the Dire Straits and the Phil Collins and those kinds of artists who've produced some incredible music over the years, as we all know. That was his thing. And he still continues today to kind of be interested. So I'll send him a playlist every so often of things that I think he'll like that resonate with his tastes. And, he's still really into it. He recently retired, so he's got a bit more time to listen to music now, which is great. So that was a big influence. And then I just jumped on it. You find your people, in school and out of school that have the same interests in music, and you form bands and you're terrible for a little bit. And then you start to play gigs and you start to realise, actually, this is starting to sound coherent and together, and it just, like most people, it goes from there. So I had a bit of formal education with violin, but it was mostly sweating it out in those rehearsal rooms with other players and just working it out by ear, really. So that was sort of my upbringing with music.
With my kids growing up, of course, I'm a classic rock guy. Back in those days, it wasn't classic rock, it's what was current.
Of course.
We would listen to Kansas or Chicago or Grand Funk Railroad or whoever it was. And of course, my kids, as they were growing up in the 90s, they were absorbing that music. And it's still some of their favorite stuff to listen to. They have their own generation, the music that they grew up on, that they and their friends would listen to. But I think musical influence can span many generations. And it sounds like it did with you, too.
100%. And particularly now, and we'll talk about this current climate, I'm sure, in a moment in more detail, but now I'm finding I want to listen to stuff that I'm familiar with. There's a certain comfort in that, things that you know well. Definitely finding comfort in things that I know backwards, those kinds of records. So that's really nice. And I think, actually, talking about the 70s and what we term now as classic rock, at the time was very in vogue, that was a golden era of recording in some ways, because it relied on performance more than anything, and great songs. I see that as an amazing source of inspiration still. When doing bigger recording projects with work, it's definitely an amazing resource, that period.
When you think about what they didn't have back then, they didn't have auto-tune. In the early days, they didn't have 24 tracks of recording or, with Pro Tools, 96 channels. You had what you had in the studio. And yeah, you may take 3 or 4 or 5 takes on the vocals, but you pretty much had to be spot on, because other than splicing and taping the tape, you couldn't fix something, with auto-tune. So we seem to forget that in our heads on occasions because it's so much easier in the studio now to make something sound great, but it was very, very organic back then.
Yeah, people had to play it, and now you don't. It was a particular thing for me. I do less playing now, but when I was starting to transfer from playing a lot to actually working more on the industry side, noticing how drum tracks would be fixed. I think people are starting to, in certain sectors of music, certainly starting to just rely on the performance again, but certainly in pop, if it's not, even if it is a live drummer, for instance, which it rarely is in pop right now, but that drum track would be, in inverted commas, fixed, even though it's a great take. It has to be on the grid for it to get mainstream radio play, and and that goes across pop, it goes across country. I'm not so familiar with country like you will be, because you're right in the bubble of it, but it seems crazy, and I think technology is an amazing thing. We can record remotely. We're doing a project at the moment where we've had 15 collaborators all record from their home studio to make one track, which is fantastic. But technology can be a great aid and benefit recordings in an amazing way that we could never imagine 30, 40 years ago. But I think it's about aiding it, not relying on it, and knowing when to use it and when not to use it.
I want to back up a second. You said 15 collaborators, all working in their own individual home studios?
Yeah, so it's a project called Lockdown Experiment. If you go onto Instagram and type in lockdown_experiment, you can find us there. And essentially, we wanted to see whether we could create a piece of music, a cohesive composition with as many people as we could, based in their home environment, because we're all locked down in home environments. Right. Yeah, we with the last person is on it today. We've got a spoken word artist who really doesn't have much profile, but he's going to be a star of the future. I'm certain of that. He's the last one to go on, and then we mix it over the weekend, and we're going to release it on Monday. So it's really interesting how it's developed, because we had no idea what was going to come out. The brief was simply, you have 15 seconds to express yourself in this piece of music. Do whatever you want. With the slight caveat of, let's try and make it flow and work as a single piece. But the first guy is a guy called David Rossi, who is an incredible orchestrator who's worked with Coldplay a lot. He's worked with a lot of pop producers and pop artists like Rihanna and Duran Duran and various other people. He started off with a really interesting string arrangement. He plays the violin amongst many other instruments, and he simply played the violin and then used a loop pedal to sort of create a mini orchestra for himself. It was all done in one live take. That was a little bit more than 15 seconds, and then we went to a beats producer who created a really great groove for it, and put a little bit of bass on it, and sort of brought it slightly more into a sort of modern sound, and then a singer-songwriter, and it's evolved from there, really. So yeah, please have a listen and have a look at the Instagram page. It's a really interesting project. We've also got everybody to film themselves doing what they do, so we're editing a video to go with it. Yeah, it should be interesting.
Very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about your company, DLMDD, building brands through sound. When I started researching this, I was like, I don't know what this is. It's going to take me a little bit to assimilate and digest. But once I got into it, it's what you guys are doing. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting time for sound and brands using sound to communicate.
And then we're also going to touch on something I picked up on. You aided James Blunt to jump off a cliff. Want to talk about that?
Absolutely.
And then nearly drowning the Foo Fighters in red paint. We definitely have to talk about that one.
Let's do that.
Hi, this is Jack Foreman with Bicoastal Productions. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Side of Music with host Bob Bender and its plethora of industry experts. You know, folks like me.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right. Everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics, all written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message. Thanks.
Hi, this is Tom Sabella, the creator, founder, and co-producer of the Business Side of Music podcast. It's loyal listeners such as yourself that make our podcast successful. Take the time to sign up for our weekly newsletter. Not only does it contain information on upcoming podcast episodes, but also informative tidbits on the music industry and even bonus items that we give away. All you have to do is sign up at businesssideofmusic.com and we will send you Larry Butler's new singer-songwriter rulebook. That's it. All you have to do is go to businesssideofmusic.com, sign up, and we will send you Larry Butler's new book. Thanks to all our loyal listeners. We love you.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio, Sascha Darrock Davies is with us. You have a company that you started with 2 other gents that I guess originally you all came from a company called Adelphoi Music.
That's right.
And you started this company DLMDD. And when I first started researching it, trying to figure out what it was all about, it's building brands through sound. It was kind of my first impression of, okay, that's what this is.
That's it. That's exactly it.
You're the agency partners director with that company?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about it, because from what I understand, it's a sonic branding agency.
Yep.
Let's dig into that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what the company is, why you guys started it, and what it does.
We all met at Adelphoi Music, who are a very well-established London music house serving the advertising industry. That's and I say we, that's myself, Greg Moore, and Max DeLucia. So we've used our surnames to create DLMDD. Very Mad Men. If you're a fan of Mad Men, that'll make sense. We're all musicians. I mean, we've all come from slightly different backgrounds. Max is sort of a more formal education, whereas Greg and I, as I mentioned earlier, Greg is similar to me, sweating it out in rehearsal rooms in dirty rock bands and the like. But, you know, lots of touring and recording. And essentially we all somehow came into the music supervision world and met at Adelphoi. And we did a project for an airline, which was very successful, and it was all about creating an audio identity for them. And we thought, well, this is interesting, and we'd all had ambitions to kind of be the boss at some point, and so we thought that was a great time to go do that, and so we formed DLMDD. So as I said, it's our surnames, DeLucia, Moore, Darrock Davies. There's a slightly more, I guess, strange story to how the name evolved. I don't know if you saw on our website, Bob, there's a little film that we made because people kept asking, why did you go for DLMDD? And, that's a very sort of traditional advertising approach. And it sort of came to me, I was going through a sort of insomniac phase and not sleeping very well. And I was lying in bed one night. You know when you get an earworm and you can't get a tune out of your head, and I was kept hearing Chopsticks, or it's actually better known as the Knuckle Song, but some people know it as Chopsticks, and it just goes da-da-lum da-da, da-da-lum da-da, da-da-lum da-da-da-da. If you slow that down, it's da-da-da. And then I thought, wow, that's our initials. And like in the middle of the night, that was a great idea, and I thought, I picked up my phone and I wrote that down, and then I woke up in the morning and I still remember, I thought, you're an idiot. But anyway, it helped me get to sleep at least. And then I mentioned it to Greg and Max the next day with a sort of smirk on my face, thinking it was just a funny story while we were eating a sandwich. And they said, no, this is great. Let's use it. I was like, come on, guys, seriously. But anyway, it stuck. That's how we came to be DLMDD. And we really, the founding principle is that sound can be a more powerful universal language than the written word. We believe that because of obviously language and border barriers. Musicians can come together and collaborate. They don't have to speak the same language, but if they speak the language of music, they can communicate. And actually, it doesn't even require musicians. I mean, we get together and we sing songs from across nations. We sing Happy Birthday. We support our sport teams with song. It's such a powerful way to communicate. And coupled with that, the idea that, a brand that doesn't think about its sound is a brand that will get left behind in the modern technological world. There's so many ways that you can communicate with sound to your audience as a brand. It's foolhardy not to be thinking about it and thinking about how you can utilize sound to put your message across, or just the reminder of your brand and the recall of your brand across. It's really interesting. There's a really interesting statistic that it takes us 0.025 seconds to recognize and process a sound. And that's way quicker than it does for us to do the same with a visual stimulus. And obviously with people's attention spans now reducing constantly, and we can all say, I'm sure, that when we're the screen time that we spend, we ignore certain elements because we know that we're just they're going to be messages, sales messages and the like. We're learning to ignore that. Banner blindness being a topic that's been discussed for some years now.
What's that called again?
Banner blindness.
Banner blindness.
If you think about the kind of banner advertising that you see on any given website that you might be visiting, or on any device really, we're training ourselves without knowing it to ignore those areas of the screen and focus on just the information we want, which kind of sounds obvious, but when you think about it from a brand's perspective, they've got to come up with ways of communicating their message, or at least a reminder, as I said, or the recall of their brand some other way. YouTube's a great example. You have approximately 5 seconds usually. You have to wait until you get to the content you want. What better way? We all do it. You click on YouTube, you dial up what you want. Okay, it's an ad. I kind of look away. I just look at my watch, whatever. That 5 seconds with audio is enough time to say who you are and what your message is, potentially. So it's really powerful. Those are the founding principles. The other thing that we sort of talk about a lot is that you can't really hear away. You can look away and you can turn things off, but it's very difficult to stop listening. That's a really interesting thing when you think about it from a brand's perspective. I love that concept when you said that. You can look away, but you really can't hear away. You can't tune things out from an audio perspective. You can, in fact, you close your eyes, you hear things better than if you're looking at it and listening to it at the same time. It's a totally different sensory perspective, right? Exactly. And sound and music trigger the same sort of areas of the brain that very few other things do. So we get the same sort of reward mechanisms from good food, from love, from drugs. Music stimulates those parts of the brain in the same ways, and they're pretty unique, those three things, to those areas of the brain and how they sort of make us feel and hear, feeling, the emotional feeling that we get from that. And interestingly, we, in terms of decision making, we make 75% of our decisions emotionally, and we justify it to ourselves later. Oh yeah, I definitely needed that new car right then and there. But actually, the impulse is an emotional impulse, and that is what triggers us to buying decisions when we're talking specifically about brands. When you started this company, you were obviously collaborating with brand partners, creating new ventures, using music and sound. What I love about it is that you're building experiences. And I kind of go back to, might have been the late 60s, early 70s, when Coca-Cola had that one theme song, Teach the World to Sing. Yes. And that song was branded, just like Paul Williams, who wrote We've Only Just Begun, that the Carpenters made a huge hit that started out here in the United States as a bank commercial. That song, and of course, Coca-Cola doing what they did with their song. You now have created a component or an element that goes with that brand. And that's really what you're trying to achieve here, from what I understand. Yes, but that's just a part of it. Like for a brand to have a theme, a musical theme that can be used across certain touch points is an amazing asset to have. And Coca-Cola is a great example of that. They've updated it relatively recently. Taste the Feeling is the new sort of song that they've been using across most of their advertising. But if you think about it, advertising is great. There is huge opportunity there to capture the hearts and minds of audiences. But what about in other environments, and how you were talking about experiences? When you're not watching or listening to the radio or looking at those 5 seconds of YouTube advertising that you want to get rid of straight away. How does a brand communicate in the everyday scenario, you know, when you're out and about doing your normal chores, or in an environment that you perhaps wouldn't expect to be sold to so much. And it's not really about being sold to. It's about recall and brand awareness. And it's interesting how there are opportunities, and there's so many opportunities where you can actually remind people of who is delivering this experience or is a part of this experience. And that's when it becomes really interesting.
You have to get beyond the white noise, because that's so much of it is what we're dealing with these days is just
Right.
now it becomes background clutter. How do you figure out how to do that?
How do you cut through? It's a very good question. Our projects generally do start with a musical element, and whether that's being just a brand tune, like the Coke example you mentioned, or derivatives of that. So, for instance, you know, McDonald's, I don't know if it's as prevalent in the US as it is, or elsewhere as it is across Europe, but McDonald's have a mnemonic, which is you hear on every time they advertise, and they're a prolific advertiser across the world. It's a short mnemonic that was created by Justin Timberlake and Neptunes back in about 2002, and that's been a part of their advertising ever since. So that's one way to do it. Then, of course, they generally derive from a brand track, so a longer piece of music, and that can be something that, again, can be used in advertising scenarios, or it can be used depending on what the brand service is. So I mentioned the airline industry a moment ago. I mean, you've got an amazing opportunity there to really communicate your brand through sound from the moment that the consumer decides to engage online, to maybe look at cost of tickets, to when you arrive at the airport and you go to the lounge, to when then you're aboard the aircraft. I mean, there's countless ways that you can then exploit your sound in that sort of flight experience. So it's looking at the ways that you can take those assets that you create for the brand and then exploit them in different ways. And there's a really interesting process of how we sort of create those assets as well, which is more than just speaking to who we feel might be a great composer. It's actually, we usually do about 3 to 4 weeks of research and development work before we even create a single note of music. And it's about understanding the brand and their core values and what the history of the brand is, and understanding exactly who it is and what its personality is, and then translating that into a musical language.
Is this something that is more, and I think there's a difference, is it something more songwriter driven or more composer driven, or is it an entirely different creative mind that's putting this music body together?
It can be a traditional composer, it can be a songwriter. We've done projects where they are definitely more sort of orchestral focused composers, but we've done a project recently which is very much a singer-songwriter project, just writing a great pop song that then is now being featured on its advertising. So it rolled out in mid-February, and it's now being featured across all their advertising, and we're looking at ways to how we can roll it out in different environments. They are a supermarket, so obviously they've got advertising opportunity, they've got in-store. Do you want to play that song in-store? Maybe not, because it's a bit out of place. There are some supermarkets that still play music. There are some that most don't. How they're sponsoring activities and outdoor events and experiential events. How do you incorporate the sounds and the composition that have been created into those environments? It just depends on what their offering is. There are so many different ways you can exploit those elements. I mean, there's actually something I wanted to try as an experiment. This may not work, Bob, so you have permission to cut it right out. But
okay.
I thought we should try it because it's a classic. It's absolutely something that I think most people understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some noises that should be familiar to you. I'm sure they will be, and anyone listening. And tell you, once I've done it, tell me what it makes you think of.
Well, it sounds to me like you're pouring a soft drink right there.
That's right. Does it make you think of any specific soft drink?
Yeah, I would have to say Coke.
Right. You can see me, Bob. For the purposes of people listening at home, Bob can see me because we've got a video feed. It's that.
It's Pepsi.
Right.
Okay.
But Coke owns that sound. Now, whether that was intentional whenever they came up with whatever brand assets they were thinking, I don't think it was intentional. I think it's fair to say they own that sound.
Yeah.
Fizzy liquid over ice is Coke, and they have used it in their advertising. They've exploited that. If you think about the Zippo lighter sound, most of us don't smoke these days. But you know, if you're over the age of probably 25 and you hear that noise, you know exactly what it is. And you don't even have to see it. Those sorts, when you start to think about sound in those capacities and in that sense, then you're starting to deal with a more complete audio identity, not just pieces of music, not just mnemonics and sound haptics that work perhaps within your apps. There's this whole outside world of audio that can be explored. And that's when it gets really interesting, I think.
Definitely subliminal messaging, and it worked here. I'm going to go pour a Coke during the break. When we come back, we're going to talk about painting the Foo Fighters in red and James Blunt, how you got him to jump off a cliff. In the studio with us today, Sascha Darrock Davies, who is with DLMDD. They're building brands through sound, as we just got to hear a little bit here. You're listening to another edition of...
Hi, this is Brian Nutter with Nutter Guitars, and you're listening to the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Wow, I just joined the Music Starts Here community. This is a truly hidden gem for anyone in the music business. Whether you live in Nashville or anywhere else in the world, Music Starts Here is like a GPS for your music career. This is the place to be if you want to get advice and direction from some seriously talented musical people who have been where you want to go. Music news, events, and a great big community with resources for artists, songwriters, musicians, studio and tech, along with music business advice from pros in the industry, all on one site. Make sure you get your free profile now. Go to www.musicstartshere.org. That's musicstartshere.org.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, long distance. I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. Sascha is with us in London, England. Thank you for joining us. This is great. I got to ask the question, what is this about James Blunt? You actually aided him in jumping off a cliff.
That's right. Before I got into music supervision, I was still a very active musician, but I took a job with a music video production company. One of the sort of rising star directors that we represented for his music video filmmaking was a guy called Sam Brown, who has now gone on to make some amazing commercials. He's one of the most sought after commercials directors, you know, globally now. But he was a fantastic music video promos, as we used to call them, director. And we were sent a brief from Warner Records in London for an artist who had not really gained the traction that they'd hoped through his first few single releases. And so Sam wrote this treatment, which was very, very, very simple. And it just featured James, the artist, sitting on a white platform on a very grey day with a sea behind him. And it was very flat colour tones. And he takes, you know, he sat there singing to camera. It's quite an emotional performance. And at the end, it's a one shot. And at the end, he simply stands up, turns around and jumps off the cliff. And the camera on a crane went straight over and followed him down. So I was involved in the team of trying to sell this idea in with Sam and his producer. Yeah, I mean, it took some convincing, but James Blunt, I don't know if you know him as an artist. You know, he's quite interesting. He's actually got a forces background. He's an army guy who was always a singer-songwriter. And when he left the army, he focused on his songwriting and has gone on to be extremely successful. If you know him, you'll know that. Because of his his army mentality and absolutely, you know, up for a challenge, he said, let's do it. And we talked about stunt doubles. And he said, if we're going to do this, there's no way anyone else is going to be jumping off the cliff apart from me.
Oh, my gosh.
And he did it. And he was amazing. And he only did the jump once, so we cheated the cut. So we did like 3 minutes of him performing to camera. And then there was an amazing camera move, which went from point of view, looked up at the sky. There was a few birds flying around. When it came down, he was standing up. And that was the clever little cut that Sam and his editor did. But yeah, that was quite fun, you know, and that propelled James Blunt's career, really. It was a song called You're Beautiful, which had phenomenally well. He had previously released it, and it done not a great deal, and then that video got picked up. I mean, we're going back sort of 2006 now. So yeah, when music video was still watched a lot on TV as opposed to kind of YouTube, pre-YouTube days. So that was great. That was a really great experience.
So let's talk about the Foo Fighters. How did they get painted in red? How did this come about?
Same director, Sam. Sam, again, you know, talking about propelling James Blunt's career, that video really propelled Sam's career as well. And he started picking up video briefs from bigger US labels as well as the majors in the UK. And yeah, again, writing a great treatment. They're in an enormous aircraft hangar type environment. Band are playing. It's beautifully shot, wide angles, from the back of the room to close-ups. And yeah, when the track kicks in, I'm going to remember the track now. I can sing you the riff, Bob, and you can tell me what it is. It goes dung 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 dung.
Pretender.
Yeah, essentially Sam had written this great treatment. It was very simple. Again, goes back to that old adage, simple is best. But the band are essentially performing in this huge space against a red backdrop. It's the floor is white. There's a red background. It's brilliantly lit. You've got those big wide shots. And then I think it's when the chorus kicks in, that red background is actually a tank full of red paint. So when it kicks in, you get the full sonic assault, and then everything is like, the whole thing is covered in thousands of gallons of red paint. That video did really well for Sam. It's a great piece even now to watch.
And the cleanup on that had to have been amazing.
Yeah. Thankfully, I didn't get involved.
With your company, you're always looking for new clients. Are you always looking for music content too? You're looking for those content providers that can give you the resources?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking to brands every day about how we can help them sort of communicate with sound. We also, as I said earlier on, we all came from a music supervision background. So in February, we launched our production division. So really focusing, that part of the business is focusing on more music content, music creation, using our sort of skills in that area, working with the advertising industry to create original soundtracks, to offer sync services, re-records. We work with a lot of composers who have amazing catalogues of music. So not a kind of music library offering, really. It's more about music resource. So we can service all kinds of briefs across advertising, across content creation, filmmaking. And that's been really, we've seen a massive sort of interest in that as well, because the three of us have sort of stepped away from the music for advertising race as we saw it and focused on the audio branding area, which is now established and doing really well. But it's been really fun to actually go back to just finding music or working with composers and creating music for advertising as opposed to a more holistic brand experience too.
And how can they find your company?
DLMDD.com.
DLMDD.com. Sascha, thank you so much. This has been great.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.
A book of matches and a rotary phone with no dial tone. The record player scratches my memories in patches. I need the sound of your voice to show the way back home.
dissonance. It's beauty and some pleasure mixed with pain, and it's feeling all the same, and it can feel like I am trapped inside my brain. I'm trying to avoid that to sustain. I know I hold the key to my own cage, but sometimes I might misplace it. And all that I keep saying is to highlight the difference that the framing it can make upon the painting it contains. Provide myself my mind is that my home is not a cage. My home is just a place where I can play. My mind is all that's needed to escape, and so I let it run free like a child does. Cause in my mind I can live the life of an adolescence. You feel the light that's inside of us, this is evident. Hold on to the hope, we connecting with friends and relatives. And this is just a writing on the page. And this is just a reminder of the days when every piece of concrete that's been paved upon the street becomes a platform for a stage. And I would dance my heart away. Now I ponder on the part that we could play. After all this darkness fades away, because it feels like it's the start of a new page. And surely know we can't just act the same, cause it will feel like golden chances thrown away.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.